This is our third master class that we've had this year. And I've really appreciated spending time with all of you who are willing to share your best practices as we go through things. Today's master class, since it's December of 2020, we're going to look at your crisis communication struggles and some success stories. Plus, I want to look at goal setting for 2021 so that we can look at what goals and strategies each of you are either thinking about adopting or that you should adopt. And as we wrap up the year of COVID-19, I'm reminded of Winston Churchill's expression, never waste a good crisis. And I have long thought that every crisis is a time to learn. Every crisis gives you time to prepare for the next crisis. Every crisis is an opportunity to build your team. And I believe that every crisis essentially creates a living classroom that gives you the opportunity to learn. We've got 4 sets of guests from 4 co-ops today, 5 guests total. The first one we're going to hear from is Lloyd Rice. He manages fiber services at SEMO. And I know one of the things that co-ops have all struggled with this year is how to have the annual meeting. And they were very creative with what they did. So Lloyd's going to tell us that story in a few minutes. After that, we're going to go to Poudre Valley Electric with Sam Taggart. He's head of strategic communications. He's the director of strategic communications. And we're going to talk about Colorado forest fires, natural disasters, or a perpetual crisis that every cooperative needs to be ready for, whether it's weather or whether it's a geological event or whether it's a fire type event. It's something that is perpetually out there that we have to make sure everyone's prepared for. Then we're going to head over to Nevada. Mark Stallings, the CEO of Valley Electric, will join us along with his head of communications, Amy Carlson. The reason we have Mark on, Mark is cleaning up what we shall say is a bit of a mess. And in the process of cleaning that up, he's got yet a bizarre issue with his solar power that their co-op provides solar panels for companies. They've been having brownout issues and load issues, which were somewhat unexpected because the whole idea behind solar was, of course, how much of the load can we shift to solar? And what we're seeing is, it's a little tough to do that. And then we're going to have Tom Ruth is also joining us. Tom is the CEO of Western from Kansas. And just a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if we should call them an opposition group, let's call them an activist group, decided that they were going to publish the salaries of all of the CEOs. So we'll talk about how to deal with something like that, which is, I find one of the hardest things to deal with is talking about salaries. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared Bro. It's a weird spelling with a weird pronunciation. That's because I'm Cajun French. So it's Jared like the jewelry store, Bro like, yo, bro, how you doing? And I have been working in crisis communications in some capacity all of my professional life. From 79 to 94, I worked as a journalist. And every day I would go out and people would tell me things that they shouldn't tell me on camera. And I thought one day I will start teaching classes to people so they'll stop doing that. So in 1994, I left the TV business and I started Bro Communications. And for 20 of the last years, I've been working a lot with rural electric cooperatives, providing media training, providing crisis communications plans, doing vulnerability assessments, and helping everybody build the platforms that they need to constantly be prepared. And this year, I also became the founder of Situation Hub. Situation Hub is the sponsor of this event. You can learn more at situationhub.com. Essentially, what Situation Hub is doing is automating a lot of the crisis communications process. It alerts internal teams quickly, and the software actually writes a news release for you. You go into a pull-down tab, you answer some questions, and it will write the news release for you, which means finally we're able to communicate at the speed of social media. Our objectives today, this is not a sales pitch for Bro Communications or for Situation Hub. This is really a place to share best practices. Since we are all stuck at home and living in virtual worlds and seeing fewer people, we're not able to go to events with NRECA or state meetings. So I wanted to make sure that we just use this as a place to gather. So the first Thursday of every month, we gather here and we discuss a crisis communications topic. It's really about sharing best practices, helping one another learn. It really gets into the core of that co-op principle of sharing. And I call it a master class because I'm hoping we get to some higher level thinking and some deeper discussions and some frank discussions about things. When something goes right, that's your chance to share with everybody else so that they can learn how to do things better. And when something doesn't go wrong, that's the opportunity for us to harvest lessons learned, as well as to say, hey, are there some tools that we can each put in place so that we don't have to struggle in the future? So this is our learning community. At the end of this class, I'll offer you some additional resources and some bonus opportunities. If you ever need to get in touch with me, my Twitter is gbro. LinkedIn, I'm Jared Bro. YouTube, I've got a video channel called The Brocast, where we try to get something up once a week. My email address is there on the screen. But a lot of times after these events, people want to talk confidentially. So if you want to have a private discovery call, that link on the screen is something that you can use to schedule time with me after this meeting, whether it's today or at another point in time, just so that you get whatever resources you have, or sometimes you just don't want to talk openly in front of everybody else about whatever issues you might have at your co-op. I always say crisis communications is a bit like an umbrella or a fire extinguisher. You don't buy an umbrella because you hope it rains today. You just don't. You buy an umbrella in case your sunny day turns stormy. Likewise, you don't buy a fire extinguisher because you're hoping to have a fire today. You buy a fire extinguisher in the unfortunate event that a crisis breaks out, that a fire breaks out. So I want us all to always think about crisis communications like an umbrella. It's something we put in place in case our sunny day turns ugly. And that's why we gather to talk about these things. And that's why we try to build the toolkit that we need to function. For the sake of discussion, my definition of a crisis is any situation that has the ability to negatively affect the revenue and reputation of the brand or organization where you work. Many people have, especially in public relations, have for decades focused on reputation management. It goes beyond reputation management. It's about your money and your ability to function in every sense of the word. So that's what we're going to look at. And as we look at the case studies today, we want to look at them through when were you able to be proactive versus reactive. So when you're able to be proactive, that means that you can do planning and preparation. Sometimes being proactive means that you can prevent a crisis from happening. So for example, if you're doing a vulnerability assessment, often you'll see things in that vulnerability assessment that allow you to say, hey, how can I stop this from happening? And you're able to eliminate a potential crisis from ever happening because you took time once a month to do a vulnerability assessment. Proactive also means that you can be fast and your response can mitigate any damage that happens. Whereas when you have to be reactive without being proactive, then you're forced into publicity and public relations. So ultimately, what we want to do is work to make sure everybody has the tools they need to be proactive. And those tools, if you want to go in depth, go to situationhub.com/blog and watch our first master class from October. And in it, we talked about 5 steps to effective crisis communications. Number 1 is to do those vulnerability assessments on a regular basis. Number 2 is to have a good crisis communications plan. Number 3 is to have a library of pre-written statements. And if you're a subscriber to Situation Hub has that library of more than 75 different types of events in there. We want to make sure that you train your spokespeople. Many cooperatives fail to train their spokespeople because they know they're out in the middle of rural farm fields, and it's not highly likely that the media will show up. But two things are happening. Number one, if it's bad enough, they're going to drive out and find you. Number two, co-ops that are closest to metropolitan areas are seeing urban sprawl. You're seeing your cornfields, your cotton fields, your soybean fields, your wheat fields turn into neighborhoods. And when those new neighborhoods sprout up, those new neighborhoods are occupied by young couples who are in their late 20s and early 30s with young children, and they're super active on social media, and they will not tolerate anything. They will take it to the media real fast. So training your spokespeople should be something that you do, as well as having regular crisis drills once a month. Not once a month, I'm sorry, at least once a year. The beauty of media training and the beauty of drills is it allows you to mess up in private so that you never mess up in public. So let's go to our special guests. Those are the lenses that we're looking through today as we work through this. Our first guest is Lloyd Rice. Lloyd is manager of fiber services. Many of you are heading into the fiber now. And Lloyd was the spokesperson, so to speak, the guy on camera, the guy who was wrangling sheep and cats for their annual meeting. So back in April, SEMO in Missouri decided that they had to move their annual meeting because of COVID-19. So this is something every co-op has faced, having to pivot. And they did an enormous amount of communications. They use their Facebook very well, and their social media channels, I think, very well, and their video channels very well to let people know. And they did a number of incentives. So this Facebook post talks about the $25 bill credit that everybody received, plus an attendance gift. You know how it is when you're trying to get people to come to your annual meeting. You give them money, you give them tchotchkes, you feed them, you have a band, and that gets people to show up. And then for those who couldn't show up, they also had live coverage on the local radio station, plus some other methodologies. And that's Lloyd there that you see in the yellow vest thanking people. So Lloyd, why don't we, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen here. And Lloyd, why don't you come on and tell us about what you guys did at your location, and how'd you manage that meeting?
Thanks for clarifying the spelling, Jared, because there's no person on the planet that would get Jared Bro out of that name. So
Tell me about
effectively, a friend hugging you would be a real bro hug, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's it.
I was bro before it was cool to be a bro.
Right. Talking about, especially in terms of that picture, which was probably, I'm a lot better looking than that in person, but that was effectively my birthday, as well as why the goofy tie on. So give me a little space there. Trying to be real proactive, Jared and group here. First of all, thanks for having us. This is really right in Sean's space, you might say, and in him preparing the rest of us to publicly speak. That's why you'll see so many of us on at least the social media side of the camera. But in thinking about, as you went through your list there, one of the things we really tried to be intentional about, Jared, is having a proactive or a relationship ahead of times with our local news media. So when that crisis does happen, they tend to at least come at it as a friend, right? If that's fair enough. And we do a series of ads with them very intentionally for that reason. And they have what's called a business break. We do a once a month business break. And it does, yes, share in that marketing slash whatever advertising space. But the true intent of it is that we feel like we are developing a relationship. So when we send linemen to Alabama a month ago, or when we have something else come up that we want a little bump with in that new space, we also have that friendly coverage. And that's something I, as one of the marketing pieces of this, really appreciate Sean letting us do, right? Because TV is expensive. But when you start to lay it on top of this crisis conversation, it really does start to, build a bridge there. And I know I could call Ryan, my KFVS contact, and he would call me right back if he didn't just pick up. So that veered a little bit away from the topic of annual meeting. Jared, we knew right away we weren't going to be able to have the annual meeting May 13th as always planned, the third Monday of the month. And two things were working at least a little bit advantageous was Missouri's co-op. The governor made the allowance to not have to do the elections as per normal, gave us some space there to breathe. We didn't have a challenged election for any of the directors. Didn't find that out till real close, how those dates kind of close out. So we knew effectively going into that date, we weren't going to be able to be there. We get our leadership team together and start going through the options, right? Do we do one at all? Do we do it virtually? Virtual was working pretty good for us at the time. Might have even felt like we were going to stay in that space, right? But then you peel that back to, well, we're a really rural co-op. We're rolling out fiber, but we've only got it to about this many of our member owners. And really, what's that start to look like? So as our conversation started to take place, we really started liking outdoor. And we had a couple of venue options for that. Can we hold it on our own campus? And we've got a good relationship developed with junior college, I would call it, for those of you that know the term, but Three Rivers College, big parking lot, lots of space, a traffic light at the turn into the campus. And that started to really take shape, Jared, just because of, again, a prior relationship. We've all got those as cooperatives. Plus our people, our member ownership, we felt like would want to come to an annual meeting. They still would want to come and see us. Again, the over under, we set at 50 because you're going to pull that forward now or push that forward to July. And I was a skeptic. I didn't think anyone would come to drive through for a $25 bill credit. But they did, Jared, and they not only came, they came in waves. We actually had a traffic crisis that we developed, right? We had 500 people show up to an event that the traffic situation they weren't ready for. Our group, yellow vests, cones, everything that we did strategically ahead of time, Jared, allowed us to manage that.
What was your main communications method to your members to inform them of what you were doing?
Great question. Social media is a go-to for us. Our people like our member owners like our social media aspects. We get on there, we talk about it. You've seen it and made mention of it. And then our Rural Missouri magazine that goes home. By the time we got it planned, we were able to get it out just in time. Always working on that deadline, right? But that was the two main platforms for advertising that.
So did you at no point think, hey, let's do RSVPs? Were you just that didn't get into the planning process, that you got ambushed with so many people?
Jared, we during the planning process for it, I'm not going to say that it wasn't on the list of things to think through, but it wasn't really high because we felt like the right thing to do was, one, to go ahead and have it, even though you had the opportunity not to. From a credibility standpoint, we knew we just wanted to. We do this every year. There is no need to shy away from this. And again, hey, let's try to make some lemonade out of this situation.
Right.
We really try to be interactive. And the one planning piece that was fundamental, Jared, was the fact that we had a food drive already planned for spring. And we had the food drive would normally be people come in, right? You give them food and they leave.
Right.
Well, so during COVID, that has to change that look. And Danette and our food drive team got together and said, okay, here's how we're going to handle the food drive. And so we were laying a foundation for the annual meeting
So the
by
food drives
using
were happening
food
first.
drive.
Food
Yeah,
drives were happening first.
correct. The food drive, I'm going to say, going to get my dates wrong here, but I'm going to say our June food drive was our test drive for the annual meeting. So
Awesome.
effectively 200 to 300 people show up for a food drive, which we knew that number. That's usually that's a pretty common piece of data. They know, and you pay for your food drive and they come participate. So we knew what 200 or 300 felt like, but when those 500 cars started showing up, Jared, it was fun. It was crazy exciting. I was loving it. We sent a lineman up in a bucket to take a picture of the madness, because again, it was again just an opportunity to lean in and to effectively kind of take advantage of a crisis, right?
Yeah.
We did get the highway patrol online, had them come out and help us manage some traffic, but it was a rather fun experience, just kind of seeing how that happened to us.
Yeah. So final thought before we move on to the next topic, for co-ops that are thinking about having a meeting like yours. Obviously, if you want more details, contact CMO and contact Lloyd. But for this class, what handful of planning tips would you offer to people?
Really advertising that ahead of time is a positive. We obviously needed 128 for our quorum. We way surpassed that. But again, setting the things up ahead of time, having that food drive ahead of time really helped us shape that traffic where that didn't surprise us once we got them on the campus, Jared. And then making some allowances for them once they were there to stay and go ahead and listen to the music and the things that were going on. We kind of made it a little bit of a carnival atmosphere. We also had made a way for you to go ahead and participate, grab your certificate and your prize bag, and just leave as well. So you could have done both, and a lot chose to stay, Jared.
Yeah, and you mentioned the band for everybody. They did keep their band. You want to be a good corporate citizen and pay the folks that you had contracted right previously. But essentially, it was almost like what we saw on TV when Joe Biden would have a campaign rally. There's a stage, everybody just parks your car and you get out your car and stay close to your car, keep your mask on, keep your distance. Good job to all of you. I really appreciate your time today. You've got a good organization there. It's always fun to work with you guys. And for those of you who want to just see some good creativity, I would say check out all of CMO's social media. Y'all are just doing a great job.
Thanks for that. We feel like even if you mess some stuff up in that regard, going live, being very transparent, and again, building that credibility with that ahead of time is just a key component in this entire conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time today. I'm going to share the screen again, and let's go to Poudre Valley. So I was joking with Sam earlier in the week when I was talking to him, being French Cajun, I was going to call this Poudre Valley. And he goes, no, that's Poudre. And I went, okay, I can go Poudre because just like 2 miles up the road from me, people talk with more of an accent that's different than mine. So Poudre Valley, unfortunately, has really had to deal with some serious forest fires for 3 months, August, September, October. The place was just constantly on fire with 2 different fires. And the image that you see there on your screen is their webpage. And I want to give props to them. I want to give them big thumbs up, because one of the things I've often said in crisis communications is, when I go to your website, I want to be able to find your newsroom. I'm always dismayed that we don't see uh, newsrooms that are easy to find. Well, here in Poudre Valley, right there on the main screen, you can click on the hyperlinks, and then that takes you to a specific page that gives you details where they had hourly updates and daily updates. And I'm a huge fan of directing people to your website and away from social media during a crisis. So in the last case study with the annual meeting, we saw that social media was very useful, but in a crisis, Facebook can be a real pain in the neck, because it gives your angry members an opportunity to vent. People just have a very short fuse during a crisis, and therefore bringing them over to a web page with more details is always preferable for me. Now, one of the things they did in Poudre Valley that I'm a huge fan of is Twitter as a way to reach reporters. I have been saying for years, you can call a reporter, you can email a reporter, you can text a reporter, and they will not respond. But you tweet to a reporter, as we see here on the screen, and that reporter comes a running. So with that, let's go to Sam. Sam, why don't you tell us a bit about your crisis communications as things progressed for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that great introduction, Jared. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. A little background about our crisis. Typically, we have a 4-person team in the Government Member Relations Department here at Poudre Valley. We had our VP retire and the communications director leave in May. So that left our key accounts person and a communications specialist whose focus was more on community partnerships. And she was the one who took over most of those responsibilities. So we were down to only a couple people in that department. So August 3rd, we had a new VP start. And August 13th, the Cameron Peak fire began. So it's a very new team getting together, just figuring out how everything works, responsibilities and duties. And then we have a major crisis happen. I myself didn't start until mid-October. And in my second week, we had a huge day of growth for that fire, where it grew 20 miles in one day. So the Cameron Peak fire started on the 13th of August, and it continuously burned for 3 months. And then we experienced days of advanced growth with these high winds that we were seeing throughout Colorado. It was in a really remote mountainous area, so we couldn't get a lot of access to it. Firefighters had difficulty containing it, and we had difficulty getting out to a lot of our infrastructure as well, just from the area that it was in. So, looking at those 5 steps to effective crisis communication Jared had pointed out, since we were such a new team, we didn't really have a lot of experience together. We didn't have a lot of experience in those like vulnerability assessments or crisis drills or anything like that. We did have a crisis communication plan, but none of us were involved in its creation. So we referenced that document in the beginning and realized quickly, we're not familiar with it. It's a little outdated. So it's just not really going to be a very usable tool for us in this specific crisis. So that's one thing.
I'm sorry, go ahead. And I'll
no,
question.
No, I was just going to move along. I was saying that's something forward, looking forward, we can definitely update that crisis communication document.
Yeah, so you're a perfect example of how so often people put off crisis communications planning. And I always try to emphasize that your next crisis could be minutes away. And so I'm always trying to urgently move people into the planning phase. So I think your organization is a poster child of the fact that it can happen anytime and happen quickly.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about how your media relations went, because one of the things that you guys got was a lot of both local and national media coverage, in part because the area was closed off and you were the only one who could get in there with eyes. You were the only one who could take pictures. You were the only ones who could take video. So tell us a little bit about that media relations and how it came together and how you use Twitter for your media relations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. So one thing in Colorado here, we don't allow media personnel into those areas affected by fires until it's deemed safe. Since this fire was so out of control and unpredictable, that was 3 months that media were not allowed into that area. So since we had access to our infrastructure, those poles, those lines, we were one of the few organizations that could get in to give regular updates. The county sheriff's department, some other first responders were able to provide updates, but we tried to be as proactive as possible. One thing we did learn in this crisis was it's a huge benefit to bring in those different departments early on. So right when we realized we were facing this type of crisis, we brought in our operations department, and we're really familiar with them so that we could communicate with them daily, sometimes hourly, whenever we had updates, statuses on restoration, when Fire Incident Command was telling us we needed to cut power for the safety of the boots on the ground. So we were trying to get those updates from our operations personnel. I think in the height of the fire, we were updating 3 times a day with them. We had standing meetings in the morning, we follow up in the afternoon, and then again before close of business, we ask if there are any other updates. That was probably one of the best things that we did, was just bring in those other departments so that we were all on the same page. And what we did with that information is, at first we created a press release, we sent it out, and it didn't really go anywhere, as Jared had said. So we started using Twitter, and we used the hashtag Cameron Peak Fire, and we just continuously updated our social media. We used Facebook as well, but that didn't get quite as much traffic. And then we created that webpage that you all saw to post information there. So when we were using Twitter, we just posted those live updates as much as we possibly could. We provided that website link so that people could get more information. They could get our direct communications email and phone number, because we were having lots of members reach out to us individually. As you can imagine, there's a lot of emotion and a lot of anxiety that's going through their minds about their properties in these areas. You know, like I said, it was a mountainous area, but we still do have year-round residents there. So it's not only cabins and retreats, we have residents and businesses in that area too. So we were trying to provide all the information that we could for them, just to be that trusted source of info.
So let me ask you this: whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a tornado, whether it's flooding, snow, what takeaways would you share with the group in the class today, as far as your best practices and lessons learned, considering that you were, figuring it out day by day as you went forward? But what would you share as best practices?
Yeah, I probably have 2 real big points. So that first is just bringing in those other departments, kind of having those conversations as quickly as you can, identifying what key people need to be looped together. We had our member relations and operations hand in hand, but we could have looped in our member services a lot sooner and got messages out to them so they could be relaying to people who were calling into their lines, things like that. So that was a huge help, just building those relationships within our own co-op. Like I said, we were all pretty new here, so
Sure.
just working together was a big help. And then secondly, we created our own document to track our member contacts, but I think there could be a better way to do that with technology through your OMS. You can track that a lot better and across the co-op. So our document, we tracked if members were calling us, emailing us, if they were sending us Facebook messages, comments, comments on Twitter as well. So we were taking all that information in just because we were having so many people reach out to us. But we could have looped in those member services personnel as well, and operations would have also been able to access that information. So I think it's just bringing people in and then keeping everyone informed as much as possible and as kind of as quickly as possible too. Those will probably be our two biggest successes, but also rooms for improvement too.
Sure. So for all of you on the call today, one of the things to think about is the group of people that he's referring to when you're building your crisis communications plan. That's when you want to assemble your crisis management team. And you want those key players on each of those teams to be the core members of the crisis management team. And then each of them can have other individuals on their team that can join as needed. One of the things that we built into Situation Hub is it gives every one of those team members a chance to sign in. So for example, your operations people can sign in, answer a couple of questions in Situation Hub, hit one button, and that will always send out the perpetual link to everybody in a situation room. So think about whatever methodology you want to use so that those key players all know that in a crisis, they need to gather information, confirm information, share information, and then distribute that information. So those are the pieces. Also, those are going to be the key players that you want to join you once a month for vulnerability assessment. I used to say vulnerability assessments are something you should do once a quarter, but in the age of COVID, I've upped that to once a month, even if it's 15 minutes, get everybody together. You guys did well. I'm impressed with what you were able to pull together in a short amount of time. Like I said, the website was very professional and using Twitter was just super smart. So I really appreciate it, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate the time. I'll just one last thing. If anybody wants to talk offline, don't hesitate to reach out. We did learn a lot of lessons learned, but it was a lot of fun getting down into the nitty gritty of those crisis communication plans and tactics once we were faced with something like this. So happy to help out however I can. And thanks again for the time.
All right, so let's run back to the screen here. And our next guest is going to Valley Electric. Mark Stallings is the new CEO there, came in January 6th. January 6th, in case you don't know, is my favorite day of the year. It is the 12th night of Christmas, the Feast of Epiphany, and the first day of Mardi Gras season, Carnival season in New Orleans for me. Also joining us is Amy, who has taken on the responsibilities of communications. Now, let me tell you what he stepped into. So his predecessor was accused of using co-op equipment and money to bury power lines at her pole. And as you see here, she was arrested. Later, no charges were filed against her. But nonetheless, when we look at a situation that affects revenue, reputation, and brand, this was one of them. The CEO and the board were also accused of improperly using funds to hide prior sexual harassment claims against a different CEO. And Mark came in as essentially the 8th CEO in 18 months. There were a lot of interim CEOs who served, and along the way, a boatload of the board members ended up resigning because of the fury of their audience, of their membership. And this is a picture on your screen of a Facebook page that is called Exposing Valley Electric Association. And they are perpetually on there ragging the cooperative about everything. If you read their content, you'll see that they're not great with grammar and spelling. I'm personally horrible with spelling, but the content is just pretty in your face with what they get upset about, and everything makes them mad at this point. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I wanted that background so that you can empathize with Mark, because the reason, after he and I talked for an hour and a half one afternoon, I said, here's what I really think is interesting for you, Mark, which is something that would come up in a vulnerability assessment, which is they're out in the Nevada desert on the California border. As you know, in California, power supplies are stretched to the limit. So one of the things that's popular is solar, and they've gone into the solar business along with their members. Yet now this is their website telling you to reduce your bill, it'll help the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then they're having to put out these advisories to conserve electricity because of peak load problems. Something that I don't know if when the co-op got into this, anybody thought, whoa, that's going to be a strange problem. But let's bring Mark and Amy on. And Mark, if you would, tell us about this situation with the load and, with all the other fury, this is yet one more thing to aggravate your members.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be with you. We thought we were only going to be dealing with everything you've just talked about, what had happened in 2018, 2019. And basically we were on the road to healing. In July, we did our internal ACSI score, and Amy led that effort. Amy stepped into a communications situation. The 15th day the 11th day I was on the job, my VP of communications stepped in and said he wanted to retire. About 30 days later, his assistant went on medical leave and stayed on medical leave from end of February through June, and then basically took long-term medical leave in June. So Amy stepped in and was interim on our communication effort in February, March, April, May, June. July, we started talking about a permanent move, and in September, she took over the marketing department, and we added one person in that, I think it was July timeframe, maybe August timeframe. So in many ways, we're in the middle of this transition in terms of communication. We're also trying to turn around a ship, so to speak, with member unrest and all the other things you've talked about. And then in August, we get hit with a Western power market power shortage. And so what's strange about this power shortage is that it happens between 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock at night, late afternoon.
Essentially, it happens at the time at which the sun goes down.
Yeah, so basically what's happening is the Western markets, California ISO predominantly, but it impacts Nevada, Arizona, Idaho, Oregon. I mean, it impacts everybody in the West. And so, because what happens is California is heavily solar, and you've had carbon generation declining and continuing to decline. And the reality is there's a lot of solar being built, but there's not a lot of energy storage being built with the solar. The reason is because the price point's not there. It's a little too expensive, and by the time you add storage, you're not competitive. But what they discovered in August was we had this tremendous heat wave, 110 to 115 degree temperatures in southern Nevada, and Death Valley truly was Death Valley at that time. We're right on the edge of Death Valley. California, southern, is seeing the same temperature spikes. Power usage in the West is going up. And so I started to monitor the CAISO website, California ISO website. What I noticed was the natural gas peaked, coal, nuclear, small amounts, but they're all maxed out. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all your base load is running its maxed out. They had about 14 gigawatts of solar, and at about 4 o'clock, as the sun starts to move downward in the western sky, the renewables start to decrease. And by 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 7:30, the renewables are basically providing no energy, no capacity. Wind is picked up maybe 3 gigawatts. So the only way that the Western market is going to survive and meet the load is if the load drops faster than the renewable production drops. And due to that high temperature and the air conditioning units running, the load wasn't dropping fast enough.
So from a communication standpoint, what did you do with your members? And have you been able to move the dial?
Yeah, it's fortunately we were able to use, and Amy can talk about this in greater detail, but fortunately I basically looked to Amy, and we had, in this interim February through July, we had brought on a new person in that communication area, and her specific job was social media. And so Amy had been working with our annual meeting. She'd been working in the comm area. So basically she had to step right up, work with her one person in the marketing, and get on the social media and come up with the pieces you showed. And so that was basically what we did. Fortunately, our members conserved enough that there never was a rolling brownout.
Oh, good.
But of course, everybody gets hyper. Everybody, oh, the brownout's coming, the brownout's coming. And in view of the past 2 years, we don't have enough of an equity trust build, so to speak. So negativity has a tendency to run a little faster and a little more rampant. Right. So we're basically trying to communicate and get ahead of the negative stories and get the actual truth out there, that if you conserve, if you do all this, we can avoid the brownout. Please help us, that type of thing.
So let's have Amy, if you can jump in here for a little bit, tell us about the communications channels that you're turning to, and how receptive is your membership, considering as Mark said, there is still hostility from all the prior administrations.
Our main one actually is social media. Twitter's not very well used here because of the demographic of our membership. Social media, Facebook particularly, and then we use Rulelight, and then we do email blasts. We're working on getting all of our members' emails. We don't have them yet. We tried the same thing as Lloyd. We did the advertising with our local news stations, not because we needed advertising, but to build the relationships. Kind of backfired on us because they kind of, whatever is the better story is kind of what we ran into with them. So social media for that was our best, because when it happened, we had less than 24 hours notice. So when we got that first one, it wasn't necessarily our power supply that was the issue. It was because we're a part of the ISO through California, we had to comply. So ours was more social media because we had to be constantly updating members for education wise, letting them know that it's not us. So we have the power. That was our biggest issue, is people thought that it was our issue, that we didn't have enough power. We did. We just had to educate them to conserve, so that because even whether we have it or not, we're still part of the ISO. So we had to educate them more than anything. But unfortunately, given our demographics, social media and Facebook particularly is our best avenue.
Yeah, so Twitter is really something you use more for media relations. Facebook is more of a member place, although that's where people vent a lot. So I really hate Facebook. It's a great place for positive news. It's a horrible place for negative news. Are you doing anything creative, like offering a bill credit if people will give you their email address? We're
actually in the process of doing that right now. Me and the other person that just started the marketing, she's actually being converted from one of our customer service. So that's one of our campaigns we're working on, trying to do, whether it's a bill credit to update, working on the Smart Hub app. Because unfortunately here, our media does not use Twitter. They are Facebook. It's very small town, very rural. So, but that's our next plan, is to do a big push for addresses.
Good. Are you able to do push notification through the app?
Not yet. We're working on setting that up. We apparently have the capability, but what we've learned is it wasn't set up right. So that's actually our project over before Christmas break.
Good. That would be excellent. Any suggestions that you would share with the group, either Amy or Mark, on how to manage an issue like this and how to manage your communications?
One thing we've done, just given our last couple of years, again, small town, rural, people come up to you in the grocery store, we've started sending out, even the things that we would send out to press releases, we send them out to our entire staff. So that same reason, we cover about 7,000 miles. So that way, if one of our line crew, up north gets questioned, he knows what's sent out there. Because like you said, social media is so rampant. We've started sending every notification to our entire staff so that they know what's going out there in public and they can be prepared as well.
Perfect. Because one of the things I always tell people is, one statement should go to all audiences. It should go to your members, it should go to your employees, and it should go to your media. And in this day and age, your employees are almost the most critical audience in a crisis, because they're on social media and anything they post can either benefit you or harm you. And because in rural communities, not only are they in public, but they're usually wearing equipment, a hat or a vest or a jacket that's branded with your logo. And one of the things I would suggest to all of you, if you haven't done it already, is what I describe as ambassador training. So you take all the same principles that we do in media training, and at your team meetings, you train your employees and you role play with your employees on how to discuss things. Because what I've learned over the years is if an employee is confronted with a negative, sometimes they will agree with the negative. So if, boy, my rates are high is what they hear in the store, they might say, well, yeah, I have the same high rates. I'm dealing with the same thing you have. Whereas what we want them to say is, well, you know, one of the things we always want is for the lights to come on whenever you hit the switch. And the reason rates are at this level is because X, Y, Z. So make ambassadors of your employees. That's a great goal for the coming year. Mark, any other thoughts that you want to add as we wrap up, you guys?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, our biggest thing is we know this isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
We've got the same risk coming next summer, the summer after. We know that the Western markets probably are not going to be able to build storage in the quantities. I mean, we're talking gigawatts necessary. We know that the CAISO approval market is basically too slow for that to happen quickly. So we're going to face this possibly. If we hit another 110 to 115, we're going to see this again in August and in September, maybe July. So we've got a period, a window here to get ready. We're looking at interruptible accounts on large power, so that and we were asked to drop about 3 megawatts. So rather than go with rolling brownouts, the thought is let's then have some loads in our back pocket that can drop and take a look at that. But we're starting to develop a strategy on how can we address this in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 year period, because it's not a 1 year event. It's going to come.
One of our folks on the call wanted me to ask, have you guys determined what amount of bill credit you might offer to get an email address from somebody who's a member? Has that been determined or discussed yet?
It has not. I mean, we were starting at like 10. We hadn't thought. I mean, we just began the process.
I think that's a fair amount.
I mean, that may be a trial and error thing. We'll start at 10 and we'll see how many we get. I don't know. That's a great question.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks so much for sharing your case study. Best of luck, because I know you've got your hands full there, and 2021 is definitely going to be a year where you get to do a lot of building and planning going forward. Let's go to Tom Ruth. Tom has, for the past year, actually, I guess, Tom, you and I first met about a year ago, and you've really spent 2020 doing a lot of crisis communications planning. You did your vulnerability assessment. We put your crisis communications plan in place. You've got your news releases. You're using Situation Hub. And then you come up with all of Kansas has a group that is fighting over something that's a bit politically skewed. And they decided to go to the 990s and gather the CEO salaries of everyone and essentially assert, and I'm going to say assert incorrectly, that electric rates are high because CEOs make so darn much money. So one of the things I learned is Tom is not paid enough when I saw how your salary was published there, Tom. But some of those guys were making in excess of $1 million, $1.5 million. So tell me a little bit about what the thinking has been both in your cooperative as well as statewide as to how you're going to respond to this.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerard, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I start here, I would like to say how grateful we are, Gerard, for your expertise to really help us be a much stronger organization to be able to respond in a very professional manner in a way that won't increase our liability. Also on the call today, I have Nolan Numerick. He's our manager of member services, and he's also our company spokesperson. And Nolan has done the lion's share of a lot of this work on our communications plan. So Nolan, please jump in there at any time whenever we talk through this. But just a little bit of very brief background is back in 2019, we had some legislation which mandated third-party consultants do a rate study here in Kansas. And it's primarily being driven by special interest in industrial groups that would like to see deregulation, and also the retail wheeling, because a lot of the large industrials might benefit from that, but it could result in shifting costs to other members were that to happen. And while there's many reasons on why electric rates in Kansas might be a little bit higher, the special interest groups want to leverage every argument that they possibly can to show that there's a problem, so that at some point in the future, they can probably keep additional pressure on the legislation to keep pursuing some of these other activities. So they put these articles out in the news about the CEO salaries, and they listed every co-op here, which there's 26 of them here in Kansas. But what they did is they laid out the different parts of the 990 to where they had like base salary, and then in column K, which is perhaps the actuarial values, things related to benefits, insurance, all of that. And they just added it all together. So the way that they took the information and presented it was very inappropriate, including not really considering that some of these folks may have taken a retirement payout during that year, or that they might be running multiple businesses. Perhaps some of the CEOs might run a regulated and an unregulated utility, or the unregulated co-op and a broadband operation. So there's many reasons for the differences. And so we've been working with, Jared to really try to understand the context in which this information is being presented, and to prepare ourselves in case we are approached by the media, that we have good actual factual information to dispel what they are producing out there. Now, the Kansas Electric Cooperatives as a whole, as whenever they met on this issue, they looked at the source of the information and who had wrote the articles, et cetera. And in this case, they decided that we did not want to respond in order not to give it legs, so to speak, and create something that might not really take off. And from what I understand and what we know today, there hasn't been any further inquiries out there. So it's kind of just maybe died on the vine for now. But this is just the beginning of this. This is a long, protracted effort by these other groups, and none of this is going away, just like with some of the issues at the other co-ops. What's probably next is looking at the stipends for, around board governance for our directors, our trustees, et cetera. So we expect all of that stuff to come. But we have been able, with, Jared's help and with all the work that Nolan has done on this, to come up with a very good story to tell. And we would never have been prepared for something like this in the past. Where we started out was like with 4 or 5 sheets of paper, to where it was mainly operational, some things regarding outages and things like that that we might communicate. And this has really opened up our eyes on how unprepared that we were. And even though I've had some media training in the past working for investor-owned utilities, whenever he asked, well, what surprises you about learning these things, is that it's uncovering all the mistakes I would have likely have made without having this type of training, and without us putting a year's worth of planning into being prepared for this, whether we use it or not. There's so much value there in clarifying the roles and responsibilities and the expectations around the communications, that it's really given us a great comfort level, even though we may be uncomfortable if the media does start to inquire about some of this, but we think we'll be very prepared on that. And so with that, I'll just stop for a moment and turn to you, Nolan, and kind of get your perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the way Jared started this whole conversation was never waste a good crisis. And, just kind of going through the steps of our crisis communication plan and the work that we put into it when this this story kind of dropped, and we were able to go through those steps, develop a statement, even though we didn't use it necessarily this time, but still informing our stakeholders, and like I said, going through our plan was really beneficial. So appreciate all the time that Jared spent with us training and getting our plan set. But yeah, I think it was kind of ignorance is bliss before we started, putting together our crisis communication plan, when Jared kind of opened our eyes, or at least my eyes, and figured, well, we need to be prepared. And that's kind of what we're working at. We're still working on it, but we're in a heck of a lot better shape than we were prior to.
Yeah. So, a lot of things we started out with originally were operational, but this kind of gives us another idea of another gap we haven't addressed yet, and that is perhaps training, media training for the board. Because if it is a governance issue, whether it's salaries of CEOs or perhaps something else, it may be that some of this communication rightfully should come from a board trustee or the president of a board, depending on the nature of that. So there's still a whole nother realm of activity there that we have not addressed yet. But it's certainly, this is an example here that shows us how much more work we have to do to be prepared. And we've already been working on some of these future questions that we think that we're going to get from the media, and inform the board and get their buy-in and make sure that they understand how we're presenting this information that best represents the organization overall. So it's just been an incredibly positive experience to have such great expertise guiding us as a small co-op. And I don't know where we'd be without it, but we would not be in a very good place. And so I'm eternally grateful for all of the help that we've been given and the ongoing education that we get from participating in groups like this, where we see all the other issues in many ways that are much worse than anything we've ever faced. And so we learn so much from that, and we appreciate, what everyone else is going through out there. And we want to learn from that as well, and we appreciate it.
Tom, I really appreciate all the kind words, almost to the point that I'm embarrassed, but it's been fun working with you and Nolan and watching the progress you guys have made in 1 year. It's just phenomenal what you've done. Now, I think one of the big takeaway lessons on this crisis of the CEO salaries is one of the things that I put in all of the crisis communications plans is that idea that you have to be ready to communicate to your outside audiences within 1 hour or less of the onset of the crisis. That doesn't mean that you have to issue a statement. There are the rare occasions where you hold the statement. And to Tom's point, this was one of those situations where I was talking both to the state association as well as to one of the other co-ops that uses my crisis communications plans and who also uses Situation Hub. And we all agreed that best practice here was, to Tom's point, not to shed light on it. The information is bogus, it's inflammatory, but what we did was we built the tools, and they're sitting there on the shelf. They're sitting on the desktop. They are ready to use. And if in a moment's notice it flares up, there's a statement ready to go out. But Tom makes a very brilliant point about Tom can't be the spokesperson on this issue, and Nolan can't be the spokesperson on the issue. It has to be the board. And if any of you want to talk to a board that does this on a regular basis, Baldwin EMC down in Summerdale, Alabama, their board goes through media training every other year. We put the whole bunch through. So I really appreciate those points. Let me share my screen and let's cover some final things here as we wrap up our day. I want to make sure that we touch on goal setting. So one of the things I would encourage you all to do is stop waiting for the most perfect time. I live my life with people on hold where, they're waiting for a new CEO to come in, or the annual report is due, or they've got to build a new website. You can think of 1,000 reasons not to do crisis communications. But as you saw with Sam's example is a perfect example that your crisis could hit in minutes. So don't wait, move on. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do is something new, a new phrase I'm using, which is to sprint. Rather than making it a marathon, sprint through it. Just about all of these steps can be put in place in 1 to 4 days, depending on how deep you want to go. So when you get to that point that you want to know more, call me and let's talk about sprinting through this process so that you take 1, 2, 3, or 4 days and get a whole bunch of work done. Like Larry the Cable Guy says, as I have here in my final bullet point, get her done. Quit waiting for the most perfect time. The 5 steps to effective crisis communications, again, the vulnerability assessments, you need to do those a lot now because you're in the age of compound crisis, okay? You've got COVID plus fire, you've got COVID plus brownout, you've got COVID plus CEO salaries. So every crisis is a more complicated situation until we get out of this whole pandemic situation. And I think you're going to be looking at 6 months to a year more of this at the rate we're going. On the day that we're holding this class, rates are in excess of 2,500 deaths a day. So we're all seeing that spike from Thanksgiving time, and Christmas is going to spike it again. So it is going to be a dark winter. So prepare. Get your crisis communications plan in place, have your statements, do your media training, your drills. Look at the first master class at situationhub.com/ and you can dig deep into all of those things. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you for being a part of the community here, and I hope you have a very blessed Christmas. There's the website there to get to the blog, to view the last 2 master classes that we've had. If you want to have a confidential conversation with me, there is the link to my Calendly. And as a thank you gift for being on this call, if you would like to subscribe to Situation Hub, we will offer you what we call the Pro Plan for the cost of the basic plan. Pricing is online and you can go and explore that. If you want to do a crisis communication sprint, I built a page on my website for you. So if you go to brocommunications.com/co-ops with a dash there, you'll see that I have the 5 steps outlined for you. And I would be most pleased to spend a few minutes talking to you about what your needs are. I love the fact that we can all get together once a month. If you have topics for future programs, send me an email, send me a text, tweet to me, phone me. I still have a good old household phone. So get in touch with me and let me know what ideas that you have. For next year, I think we're going to go in January probably deeper into planning for the year and kind of help you map out a whole year of activity. As we get into February, I think we're going to try to talk about some of the social media volatility that often happens when those high winter bills come in so that you can prepare for that. As we get into the warmer months from March, I think one of the things we should look at is building that equity. Mark mentioned the phrase building equity with your audiences. Sean is doing some great stuff at SEMO. We'll bring him back as a guest. I'm also seeing some people doing some really creative things with podcasts and blogs. So we've got some good things to look at for the next 3 months coming forward. In the meantime, I wish you nothing but wellness and good health. And like I said, I hope you all have a blessed Christmas, and we will see you the first week in January. Thanks for being here today, everybody.